Good morning. I'm really excited to kick off day two of CEPR's Economic Summit, and it's a tremendous honor to be joined today by Sal Khan and Katrina Stevens. And I know this is going to be a really fascinating conversation today. Technology has become so intertwined with K through 12 education, and understanding the implications, hurdles, and promises of that is just so incredibly important. We've learned quite a few lessons from how online schooling played out during the pandemic, and Sal and Katrina will be exploring some of that during the next hour. Before Sal and Katrina get started with their fireside chat, I want to briefly introduce them. I could spend a lot of time on this, so I'm just going to try to hit the highlights because I want to get to their discussion. So Sal Khan is the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, a nonprofit organization that provides a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. He's also the founder of Khan Lab School, a nonprofit laboratory school down the road a bit from Stanford in Mountain View, California, and Schoolhouse.World, a new nonprofit that he started during the pandemic to offer free tutoring over Zoom. Sal's interest in education began while he was at MIT, where he developed math software for children with ADHD and tutored 4th and 7th grade public school students in Boston. He founded Khan Academy in 2008, and the platform includes more than 70,000 practice problems, as well as videos and articles that cover a range of K through 12 subjects. Nearly 20 million learners use Khan Academy every month in 190 countries and 51 languages. Sal has been profiled by 60 Minutes, featured on the cover of Forbes, and recognized as one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world. Katrina Stevens is CEO of The Tech, and the first educator and first woman to lead the San Jose-based Science and Learning Center. As an educator, administrator, and startup founder, Katrina has focused on ways to create inspirational and impactful learning experiences for young people around the world. Before joining The Tech, Katrina was the director of learning science at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where she oversaw a $200 million portfolio of 67 grants. From 2015 to 2017, Katrina was deputy director and senior advisor in the US Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology, where she led the Future Ready Schools movement to help district leaders implement best practices in digital learning. Before her time in government, Katrina was a teacher and both a school and district administrator. She's written about the educational technology sector as a journalist, and has also consulted with a wide range of education startups, foundations, and nonprofits. So with that, please join me in welcoming Sal Khan and Katrina Stevens to the CEPR Economic Summit. Over to you, Sal and Katrina.
Well, thanks so much, Mark. I think what we're going to do is I could give a little bit of a background on what we're up to, and then I'll pass it over to Katrina, and then we'll talk. We'll have a conversation. I would want to start. I mean, it's really exciting to be here with Katrina. Katrina and my lives have intertwined over the years, but especially in her role here at the Tech. I have a theory, and I don't tell the team or supporters of Khan Academy whether I really believe this, but I definitely invoke this theory that benevolent aliens are using Khan Academy to prepare humanity for first contact. And I say that because there's been many things on my journey to going into Khan Academy that feel more than just chance. And I have taught statistics, and I know many of y'all are experts at statistics too. So if you're the person in the room who flips heads 8 times in a row, you feel like you're blessed in some way. But it might also be benevolent aliens. And I say that because back when a lot of y'all know that Khan Academy started with me tutoring cousins, and then making some content for them, making some software for them. And I remember 2008, 2009 was a time where Khan Academy as a hobby was starting to overtake my life. There was tens of thousands of people using it, but I had a day job, and I really didn't understand how I could maybe devote more of my time to Khan Academy, which I had set up as a not-for-profit. And it really was the Tech that was the first organization to recognize Khan Academy as like a legitimate project that had a real chance of impacting the world. And I don't know if the folks at the Tech, whether Katrina recognizes it, but that was one of the signals that I said, okay, the benevolent aliens are telling me something. Maybe I should work on this full time, whatever it is. So Katrina, thank you for that. And thank you to the Tech for that. I'll just give a quick overview, get everyone caught up. I've spoken to this group many years ago where I talked about the origin stories of Khan Academy, et cetera, et cetera. I guess just to put everything in a frame, as Mark introduced, not-for-profit, mission-free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And I now add the parenthetical, and we're serious about that. It's easy to have a big, high-minded mission, but like we're actually serious about creating a world where everyone has access to a free, world-class education. And we see that as there's really 3 pillars to that. One is can we make all of the core academic material from pre-K through the core of college available to everyone in the world? That is instruction, practice, feedback, assessment, and early as pre-K all the way through college level coursework. The second pillar is, if we're going to do it, can we do it in a way that leapfrogs what happens in a traditional system? In a traditional system, students are moved lockstep through the system. You get an 80% on the test. Too bad that you didn't know 20% of the material. You are labeled a C student, and the whole class will move on to the next concept, somehow expecting you to master that next concept, even though they just identified that you didn't know 20% of the more basic one. And we know where that is leading us. My least favorite stat, or my favorite least favorite stat, is some of the statistics on college algebra, and I just use that as a signal of how broken the system is. I would argue because of the lack of personalization and mastery learning. Right now, we are marching students through courses that we call pre-algebra, algebra 1, algebra 2. Most students take geometry, pre-calculus. Many of them take calculus. And then when the ones that actually graduate from high school do everything they're told, when they actually get to the college system, at the community college system, you have about 70% of these students are told that they are not even ready to learn algebra yet. They're like, yes, I know your high school made you march through these courses, but you have so many gaps, and they're enforcing it for the first time now when you're 18 or 19 years old, that you're going to essentially have to go back to 7th grade math. And the numbers at, say, the Cal State system are 60%. So a great majority of students, even college algebra, in my opinion, is really a remedial course, but that students don't even place into when they get into college. And to me, that's the starkest example of how broken the non-mastery based seat time model is. So our second pillar is, now we have the tools, the technology, where we can allow every student to have the opportunity and the incentive to fill in their gaps, to move at their own time and pace. And also, how do we engage them? I'd argue the number one way to engage a student is to let them work at their zone of proximal development, at their learning edge. But can we gamify things? Can we provide as many supports? Khan Academy obviously has as much practice, instruction as students need, but we also need to support the parents and the teachers, because they are the main supports for the students. And then, as Mark alluded to, we're thinking about free tutoring. Schoolhouse.world is a not-for-profit we started during the pandemic. We can talk more about this, but this is leveraging volunteership in order to give anyone access to free homework help, free tutoring around the planet. So as many supports as you can provide as people are learning at their own time and pace across all of this core academic content. And then the last pillar of Khan Academy, and when we last chatted several years ago, this was a little bit of a glimmer in my eye, but the pandemic and the benevolent aliens have made this a little bit more tangible in the recent last few months, is how can all of this mastery that students can hopefully accumulate through Khan Academy, and in the ideal world, it's Khan Academy in a supportive environment like a school, but how can that mastery actually translate to a signal to colleges, to graduate schools, to the workforce? So essentially credentialing. And just to make an example, or tie the thread with the example I gave about college algebra, right now we're doing a pilot with Howard University where we're going into Title I high schools, and we have a course on Khan Academy. It's essentially Algebra 2, but it's called Howard College Algebra. And the students are working at their own time and pace. And as they master that course in high school, and these are students of poverty in Title I high schools, they will get transferable college credit from Howard University. So in a lot of ways, it immediately, in a good way, short circuits this whole notion that these kids are, we know the historic data for these kids, a lot of them are going to drop out. A lot of them aren't even going to go to college. Now we're able to give them true college algebra credit because they've truly mastered the material in 10th or 11th grade. Not only is that kind of a hard to dispute benefit, but it also is a major economic benefit for the students' own lives, and also, frankly, for the system and the state not having to do remedial courses. And so we're continuing to push the envelope there. The state of New Hampshire is famously a competency-based state. If students can authenticate their mastery on Khan Academy, they now get high school credit for it. So we're moving to this competency-based world, and college admissions as well. I get off my soapbox. schoolhouse.world, when we said, okay, we're going to leverage volunteer tutors, we said we need a way to verify that they know the material before we train them to become a tutor. And we created a mechanism where they take a Khan Academy assessment while they record their face, they record their screen, and they have to explain their reasoning out loud. They get to 90% on that assessment, great. They submit it for peer review. If they don't get to 90%, not a big deal. They can take a different, we generate as many assessments as they need. They can take it again and again and again. But a student, once they show mastery, then we can say, okay, you know, unit 1 of calculus, you're now ready to tutor that. But that's also universities, especially during the pandemic, said, hey, that's an interesting signal that in a lot of ways is very accessible and very equitable for a student to show what they know or what they don't know. And so beyond getting college credit, beyond getting high school credit, University of Chicago, Case Western, and MIT are now using that certification as an optional part of their college application process. And what these universities are finding valuable is not only are they able, in a very equitable, accessible way, free way for students to show what they know and don't know, but it puts them on a journey to tutoring. So you could imagine a place like Stanford, a place like U Chicago, a place like MIT, a lot of students with straight A's, a lot of students with great test scores, but how many of those students can really tutor calculus? How many can tutor physics? How many can tutor chemistry? And so we're hoping that the tutoring aspect and being a highly rated tutor actually can be even a more powerful signal for admissions, for internships, or even potentially the job market. So I'll stop there. You know, there's a lot to talk about. The pandemic was a huge accelerant. A lot of negative things happened in the pandemic, few silver linings, more energy than ever behind closing the digital divide. More energy than ever about thinking about alternative credentialing structures, learning structures, addressing learning loss, but we can talk more about that. But I'll stop talking and I'll hand it over to Karina.
Oh, it's interesting because we can talk about it too, but some of those are related journeys in terms of the pandemic being both an accelerant and kind of showing us some of the true divides that exist in our country. So not everyone may know about the Tech Interactive, but we are at the center of Silicon Valley and we're at the centers of downtown San Jose. For the last 35 years, our goal has been to inspire visitors and guests and our users to become problem solvers. We are a family-friendly science center that has lots of both exhibits and experiences on the floor. The goal of all of those is really to be able to inspire people to be able to think about large problems in STEM and small things that you can do. So it's really all about what kinds of trade-offs you can have. The way we think about it is that the world right now has some pretty significantly big challenges. In fact, I would actually go so far to say is that humanity is really at a crossroads on many fronts. And we want to be able to help create the next generation of problem solvers to meet those challenges. And our goal is really to be able to inspire folks to use technology for social good. How we do that, we have a really intensive R&D process. So we make sure that all of the experiences that we create, whether it's on the floor, whether it's on TikTok, or whether it's being used in school classrooms, where we carefully think about how do we design something so that it appeals to a large range of young people. How is it that it engages and brings folks in? We really take complex concepts, like sustainability is a good one, very complex, lots of systems thinking. That's what the theme of our newest exhibit. And how do you make that simplified so that it is easily accessible, and we create those in more playful settings. So essentially you're having fun, but you're also really learning and grappling with some complex concepts. We recognize that young people really need help, especially young people who are coming from families who don't have folks who are working in like the big Silicon Valley companies in the region. They see those companies locally, and they don't really know how to get there if they wanted to have a job in those, or it didn't ever even occur to them to think about that they could go into those careers. So we know that young people coming from these circumstances really need even additional help in being able to kind of get that spark. So a lot of our work is around is actually that, inspiring and getting kids excited. We talk about the saying around, you have to see it to be it. And so we think about how we design so that kids can see themselves as being potentially researchers or scientists or solving big world problems. And then we do once we have kids have that kind of spark and interest, then we have programs that take kids even further along that journey around developing their skills and confidence. One of those, for example, is our Tech Challenge. So this is much more mastery-based, Sam and Sal, as you were talking about, around so that the oldest running competition in the country for engineering. And so we have kids who spend months together collaborating, solving a more open-ended problem, and then they showcase the work that they have at the end of that. We take teachers actually on a very similar journey. So a lot of teachers are a little nervous about STEM or teaching STEM. And so we take teachers in cohorts where we do deep professional development with them so that they can then bring that into their classrooms. And the last few years, we've taken 350 teachers through there who are local and really being able to develop those skills and confidence in their classroom, which then gets passed on to the kids. But similar to what Sal was talking about, we have come to realize that as a trusted community resource, a lot of our public institutions don't have a lot of public trust at the moment. Museums are actually one of the places where we still actually have that public trust. And so as a trusted community resource, we see ourselves as being able to be really good connectors for folks, particularly, again, who don't know how to kind of navigate getting into a STEM career. So we have deep partnerships with districts and schools, both locally, and then also the pandemic allowed us to be able to go global. And we have deep connections to our corporate partners and our higher ed institutions that are around here. And so our community is really asking us to be able, once you get kids excited and they start to build skills and confidence, how do they actually get on that career trajectory? What does that look like? Because it's much more complicated if your family has never, especially if you're first generation, again, or if you've not, you see those organizations, but don't know that you could have a job there. And so we are really thinking about warm handoffs. How do we get a young person who's interested, and we do a warm handoff to partners who might have externships or internships or scholarships or access to mentors or even kind of higher ed institutions. And I think one of it's not just that this is a nice thing to do, but going back to the fact that we have some pretty big world challenges right now. And we need more people and more lived experience to be able to help tackle those big problems and those big challenges. And so our goal is really to be able to inspire young people to go on that journey, to give them the skills and confidence that they need, and to be able to help them kind of take the next steps to be able to end there. And I think that, Sal, both of our organizations are really particularly focused on reaching students who have less access, who have less social capital, who have fewer opportunities. And it's really on us to be able to figure out ways that we can kind of close that opportunity gap for our kids. So the topic we have, the title of our session is really around, does tech Silicon Valley, does that make education better or worse? Are we doing harm or are we helping? So that's a meaty topic for us to kind of dig into.
Yeah, I'll throw out one thing, because I often I've come up with what I call the museum analogy, and it's very appropriate because we're talking.
Yeah.
A lot of times when people talk about, and it is true, a lot of these innovations, whether it is access to Khan Academy, access to Khan Academy is predicated on having an internet connection, especially in the early days, and even today, an educated family is more likely to know about Khan Academy. More likely to recognize the benefits of using Khan Academy and therefore get their students to use it. Although that has changed, right now, especially in schools, we are overrepresented in schools with majority free or reduced lunch. But especially in the early days, many of the early adopters might have been families already with resources. Similarly, sometimes at a library or a museum or science museum, there could be the argument, I take my kids to a science museum, I take them more to the tech, maybe more than the average low-income family. And so there's sometimes an argument where people will look at that and they'll say, oh, well, that could be driving up inequity because the haves are taking more advantage of, or maybe disproportionate. But this museum metaphor that I like to say, it's not about the proportion that are using something, it's about what happens if you take it away. So if you were to take my local library here in Mountain View, I'm sure when I visit, it's majority people who are accessing it are fairly well-heeled people, probably Google employees, et cetera, et cetera. But if you took that library away, the children of Google employees will continue to get books. It'll just be slightly less convenient, while the less well-heeled folks in Mountain View are no longer going to have access. Similarly, the Tech Museum, I might take my kids there, but if the Tech Museum, God forbid, were to disappear, I would find other enriching things to do with my family. But it's all of the students in poverty, students who otherwise would not have access, who are going to have a major loss. And the same thing is true of Khan Academy. It's a good thing that, famously we got on a lot of people's radar back in 2010 when Bill Gates was very openly saying how he was using Khan Academy with his kids. And that was a very powerful signal because all of a sudden it was a signal to the rest of the world that, hey, for free, you could get something that, the most well-heeled people on the planet are using for their kids, even though they could afford whatever they want. But, regardless of the distribution, and of course we want a disproportionate number of students of need to be using these resources because we have a lot of evidence and we can talk about how it benefits them. But if you were to take these things away, what's going to happen then? The affluent are going to find something while the less affluent aren't going to have it. And so a lot of what we talk about at Khan Academy is, can we be like the shadow safety net education system for the world eventually? It's a very grand ambition. And I kind of shied away from saying that 10 years ago, but we're now serious about that and very open about that. But the ideal is you're used with the school so that we can accelerate any environment. Even if you go to the fanciest school, we can still make that better, more personalized, more engaging, better competency-based signals for folks. But I'm curious, Katrina, how you've been thinking about that. When I'm sure you get some of the similar questions, especially sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley.
Yeah. And I think there's two directions on that. So one, just in terms of us as the tech sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley, there is often a perception that, and this is a nationwide perception, that science centers are places where more middle class, tending to be more white, attend. And so we already have that kind of mental barrier or perception that we have to go through. And I think that's, again, that's the responsibility is actually on us to be able to figure out how do we make those pathways easier. So one of the things we're looking at right now is there's communities that we deeply care about and really want to have more folks come to the tech in parts of East San Jose. So we're going to create actual maps and go, if you are close to this bus stop, here's the way to get to us. And that both says, we care about you, we thought about you, you're welcome here. And then we've designed things so that they're comfortable and made it easier access to be able to do that. And we have programs that allow that. But it's similar to, I think, any kind of technology. If you really want it to be able to close a gap, you have to go through all of that, kind of user-centered design. You have to think about what are the barriers that are getting in the way and how do we actually close those gaps. When I was in the Obama administration, I was part of the Connected initiative around how do we get more, how do we get high speed into all schools? And we started out as around 30%, we ended and we were closer to 90%. But we also started to realize that you're trying to create more equity, but at the same time, you start to actually create some inequities if you're not careful. So we talked about both the digital use divide and a homework gap. So suddenly kids who have access to all kinds of technology can do more at home with their resources, including a Khan Academy. But you've got kids, we literally have pictures of kids who are sitting at McDonald's because that's where the Wi-Fi was, trying to do their homework. And so and there's been a lot more attention drawn to that now as we're, as came through the pandemic, there's that much more illustrated. But you have to be very careful about how you think about those programs and making sure you're doing that and balancing that out. I could always also tell as I was traveling, if you told me the zip code of a school, I could tell you whether technology was being used for kids to be essentially doing worksheets online. Like here, you're going to go do a bunch of practice sheets versus kids who are able to use technology to kind of create and share and connect with one another and actually trying to tackle some real problems. And it was all zip code based. So even if you have technology, you still have to have the training and people have to know how to be able to think about how it gets used and what that looks like. We saw that during the pandemic. We saw that most schools and kids had access to technology, but if anyone looked at the pre-reads, Learn Platform has been tracking that use. And there's a huge divide in terms of kids coming from lower income communities in terms of what truly access and engagement they had during the pandemic.
Yeah, we saw the same thing. Just as K-shaped recovery in the economy, same thing happening for students. That families that are more well resourced it was hard for everybody, but they did reasonably well when it came to academic progress. But the families that were not well resourced, did not, the homework gap was not closed for them. They suffered, they were already falling behind, but without the pandemic. I mean, my college algebra stats that I gave, those are pre-pandemic stats. Unfortunately, they're probably going to get worse now. And those are just, and those stats would be much worse if you separated by, socioeconomic segments. So yeah, it's everything that was a problem before the pandemic is now a bigger problem now. Although it does seem, I'm curious if you think there's kind of been more energy. It sounds like the homework gap is definitely one that we've seen more energy. You've talked about as well.
I do. I mean, when I was in the Obama administration, to imagine that the country would get to a place where we would want to have universal broadband in households, that was unheard. That was just a pipe dream. And that was built into some more recent bill. People are recognizing that really is a commodity that everyone needs if you're able to have access. So there are places where I think that people looked and recognized and saw that. And we've got, if you look at some of the numbers around months of learning that kids lost, or unfinished learning that's happening right now. Kids were losing between 4 and 5 months, whether it's reading or math, as an average. But if you're looking at kids who are coming from schools that are in higher poverty areas, it's closer to 7 months. So even there, we're still actually seeing those kinds of gaps. One of the things I'm worried about is that we're seeing about 17% of high school seniors, an average, are saying, I was planning on going to college and now I'm not sure that I'm going to. And if you're looking at families of kids of color and lower socioeconomic, that's 26%. That's a quarter of the kids who are planning on going to college who've said, I don't think I'm going to do that. We were hearing from our local community listening.
And that's of kids who would have historically
planning on going. Yes.
This isn't like the kids who are already.
Yes. So these are kids that aren't, they were already thinking, this is what I plan to do. What we're hearing locally, and Carnegie also did a Gallup study on this, is that kids are saying, it's not that I think I'd still like to do that, but right now I'm worried about making money for my family and to support me. And so I think it's anything that we're thinking about in terms of recovery, we have to think about, kind of a pay to learn models. Folks just can't go to college without being able to also have an income at the same time. It's just not, when you talk about that, the K approach, some folks, families have really seriously been hit. People have literally lost family members, and then certainly have lost jobs and have lost income. So,
and one of my hopes, and that even makes it more important, because people are going to want to come back to the system at some point. But I actually don't think there's any practical reason why we can't make the first 2 years of college free via online mechanisms. Yes. And then you can have others. It won't be some people are going to be able to do it online alone, but then other people will have other supports. But we can make as many of those as free as possible. And I'd also argue that if you make it truly mastery based, those first 2 years, someone who's actually mastered the first 2 years of college, I would argue, is more educated than your average college graduate. I would propose, universities, we study everything at universities except the efficacy and retention of the university itself. I would argue, take a top university and give a freshman physics exam to physics majors 5 years after graduation. I think most of them are going to flunk it. Now, there could be other arguments. They learned how to think. They got other, time management techniques by going to college, et cetera, et cetera. But those are very squishy things that's very hard to pinpoint that actually happened. And I would argue that a student who's actually able to master their core gen ed courses, STEM courses, but also your writing, your humanities courses, your history courses, they're actually able to master it. And actually have the self-regulation in some cases to do it on their own time and pace, that is at least as strong of a signal. And so I think just from a job market point of view, I've actually started going to employers. I'm like, if I can show you a young person who is a top tutor of statistics, why wouldn't you want to hire them? You're hiring all these other college grads, none of them could tutor statistics. And statistics is going to the heart of analytical thinking. Pretty much every job, you have to be able to think reasonably about statistics here. Any grad school, that's kind of essentially the core prerequisite skill. But yeah, it's an interesting time. I don't know, Mark, if you want us to, I could ask Katrina a million questions, but I know there's time for you to ask us questions or us to take questions from the audience.
Sure. I mean, I've got a ton of questions. I want to invite people from the audience also to send in their questions. And I think, one thing that I'll just start out with, both of you have been, pioneers in this area of leveraging technology to improve education, primarily of young people in the US and around the world. And how do you think about assessing? So as economists, so I'm an economist, and we're always trying to think about what is the effect of something. And so it is, I think it's a little tricky in this area because people have the option. They can opt into Khan Academy. They can opt into the tech. And, economics has done a ton of research over the years about how that makes it hard to figure out what the effect is, because the people who opt in systematically differ from the people who don't in unobserved ways, and just makes it really, really hard to think about that. So I'm sure you both have thought about that, and I'm not suggesting it needs to be at the level of an FDA trial where half of people get something and half of people don't randomly. But I'm just curious here how you think about that.
Yeah, I could take a first stab at it. So there's a lot of the classical ways that we've been trying to approach it. We have an efficacy and research team, and for example, our Khan Academy Kids app, which is early, it goes from second grade essentially for 2-year-olds all the way through 7-year-olds, reading, writing, social, emotional learning, and math. The University of Massachusetts did you obviously can't do a blind study because people know whether they're using Khan Academy or not, but you can do they did an RCT, and that RCT saw a pretty strong signal, actually a stronger signal on the reading comprehension side than on the math side. But if students did 20 minutes a day for 6 weeks, which isn't a huge amount, that it essentially closed the gap. The achievement gap is pretty correlated with income, as we all know. It closed the achievement gap between kids who are in the bottom quartile of income and kids who are at the median, essentially, in 6 weeks. So that's probably like our strongest RCT that we have. We have 50 efficacy studies generally. Most of them are someplace between correlational and quasi-experimental, but they tend to show a similar association around if students are able to put in around 45 minutes a week on Khan Academy, depending on how you measure. We're seeing effect sizes between 0.2 and 0.8 for a year of intervention at a fairly low dosage of 45 minutes a week. In terms of growth, we're seeing that translate to about 30-40% more growth than expected. What's interesting about our partnership, so we're the official practice for the SAT with the College Board, and that's actually helped in this partnership change the nature of what the PSAT is about. It becomes something very powerful. To your question, the PSAT historically was just this random test you took in 10th or 11th grade. If you did well, you become a National Merit Scholar, et cetera, et cetera. Now the PSAT essentially acts as a diagnostic and pretest for personalized practice on Khan Academy. So students, when they get their PSAT scores in 10th or 11th grade, they can link their scores to Khan Academy. Now, there could be confounding variables about who's willing to link their scores and all of that, but we see that it's a pretty good random sample that are linking their scores. And then of the people who link their scores, we're able to track them through their work on Khan Academy all the way to the SAT, which is essentially now becomes a post-test. But we're talking about an N of about, there's before test optional, there was about 2 million SAT test takers, about 700,000 of them are linking. So we have like an N of 700,000 every year where we have a pre-test. We see really granular their behavior on Khan Academy, and then we see the post-test on the SAT. And there too, we're seeing very strong association with time spent on Khan Academy. Now, we're also able to dissect particular actions that are more likely to correlate with gains, but we saw very strong results there. But one of the things that I'm really excited, I cite this Howard College algebra pilot, is that if we know the historical data of all kids in the country when they go to community college or four-year colleges, 60-70% don't even place into college algebra. If you talk about kids in poverty, kids of color, kids in Title I high schools, we know those numbers are worse. I don't know what those numbers are, but they're worse than that 60-70%. Probably 80-90% are not even placing into college algebra. If we're able to show that by 11th grade, we can get 90% of those students to get true college algebra credit from a very respectable university like Howard University, that I think transcends, effect sizes and any type of, nuanced statistical analysis, because you just went from only 10% of kids even being able to take college algebra to 90% of kids testing out of college algebra. And when you speak in economics, if you talk to any governor, I don't know, it might have changed in the last few years, but if you talk to a governor 3-4 years ago, a lot of their number one priority were unfunded pensions, and their number two priority was the cost of remedial education in the community college and four-year system. I mean, it's literally a billions of dollar problem that just this college algebra thing might be able to fix. We're talking to the New York City Department of Education, and we're saying, hey, and we're talking to the CUNY system, City University of New York, what if in 5 years, every graduate or 90% of the graduates of the New York City Department of Education already have college algebra done, not just because we're watering it down, but they've actually mastered the material. And so they actually also have a higher chance of success in later courses versus what traditionally happens. So those are generally how we're thinking about things.
Okay, thanks so much, Sal. Katrina, would you like to add something to the mix here?
Yeah, because I came more from formal education, and then I'm moving into the more informal space. And in the portfolio I had at Chan Zuckerberg is really actually looking at how do you do particularly inclusive measurement. So how do you make sure that the measures that you put in place are things that are useful for community and help you actually make decisions about things. And so one of the things where in the Science Center world, we'll do things that are around, kind of an efficacy study, and it's usually on a particular program. We actually have a lot of efficacy studies on like our teacher training, because that's a lot easier to measure. Measuring spark is complicated. And so that's one of the things that we're starting to dig in even deeper. We have a partner called Project Evident that's actually helping us set up that kind of continuous improvement with the ability to be able to track our impact even better than what we do. We've had some instances where we had a district who had a measure that allowed us to be able to look at, did the work that we did with them impact STEM identity shifts, and we were able to show a significant shift on there. So in the places, we're trying to look, within traditional measurement that already exists, are the places we can show that we're having some efficacy. I do think we talk more anecdotally around, the deep engagement in one of our labs when you come on a field trip. Is a roughly equivalent to about 2 weeks in terms of how people remember the tactile experience and the kinds of ways that we design complex ideas and kind of simplify them and put them in a kind of playful context. Allows young people to actually hold on to those things and to conceptually understand them better. And so we do the pre and post tests, but we're really looking at being able to develop that even more deeply. And a piece of, Sally, you were kind of talking about this, the accreditation piece of it. And so we're seeing similar. So we've now launched a kind of a badging program for younger kids, which then allows us to be like, hey, you earned a bunch of badges on these kind of smaller things and shown you've got some interest. Let's then suggest you do the tech challenge, which is a much deeper engagement. And we're similarly looking at being able to get kind of dual credit. Can you get some college credit to show mastery? Because those kids really truly can show, like, we've done collaboration and we know the engineering design process and we know how to kind of take that through an iterative cycle way more than kind of a pencil and paper test that a young person might do in a school. And I think it's particularly important as we're moving forward and we start having newer emerging technologies, and we're looking at like VR and AR and some of these, and the use of AI. It's super important for us to be paying attention to what is the efficacy of these, what is the impact that those technologies can have, and to think about dosage. Because oftentimes dosage for education technology, if the ed tech company is setting it, they're actually setting dosage based on how like the economics of it. It's sort of like, okay, like if you pay this much and you do 20 minutes a week, we actually need to shift that and to start looking at what is the right dosage to get the impact that we want. And to be really, because there's actually a lot of money that gets misspent in ed tech because people aren't actually recognizing like the amount of when it works for whom and what context, because they're actually not measuring it in the way that needs to be measured. So there's shifts in the field in terms of being able to do this a little bit better.
Great, thanks to you both for that. I now have a question about coding, but I just want to give a little bit of background. Katrina, if I remember correctly, you were an English teacher at one point.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is
so
correct.
You might find this interesting. 10 or 12 years ago at Stanford, more undergraduates majored in English than in computer science. it has changed a little bit over the last 10 or 12 years, as you can imagine. And so just on that note, it's kind of CS has exploded here at Stanford, but not just at Stanford, in a lot of places. And there are a lot of STEM outreach programs in recent years that have focused to a significant extent on coding. And I'm curious to hear from both of you, is that a good focus, or should STEM programs be focused on a much broader set of skills?
Yeah, so I'll tackle that first.
This is a question from the audience, by the way, and feel free, audience folks, to send. I've got some great questions, but feel free to send more.
Yeah, so I when I think about coding, so there, of course, we need to have folks who actually, go into computer science. I think but we should also start seeing a bigger shift around data science and some of the other more related. What we hear from young people is that they want to solve world problems and challenges. They're interested in climate change. And so the way to get them into things like coding and data science and some of these other fields is actually to focus on the problem rather than to focus on the skill. And so if you can show young people, you can use data science, you can use computer science to be able to solve a problem, to make a change in the world, you're significantly more to get a much broader, diverse group of students going into those. When I think about in terms of computer science, we have that field right now is actually significantly disproportionate in terms of who goes into it. And so I think that there's a lot more work that we can do in terms of making it more accessible to young people of color. So there's some definite moves we can make there. And some of the other fields that are a little more emerging, I think we could actually even start there and have a different set of folks who are going into some of these fields, and that could fundamentally actually change some of the fields that we're looking at. So I think that a simple focus on coding often prevents a larger group of people being interested. So if you kind of twist how you talk about it into other ways, then I actually think that that's when you are able to get a broader group of people going into those fields.
Great, thanks so much, Katrina. Sal, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, I think a lot about it. I mean, as a parent, obviously, when we think about what we're going to be doing on Khan Academy, obviously we started a school too, and I actually think, and I am biased because I have a computer science background, but even there, I think there's a difference between software engineering and computer science. Especially at a place like Stanford, a lot of the computer science curriculum is going to be on P versus NP and polynomial time and all this theoretical stuff that really. It is actually very interesting and intellectually rigorous, et cetera, but it actually has very little bearing on what most people are going to do, even if they were to become software engineers or go into tech. And that's why and at the same time, in a lot of the, I would say, elite universities, students still feel the need to go to a programming boot camp afterwards so that they can get some of the, at places like a Stanford or MIT, there's almost a purist, like, hey, we're not going to teach you like real, quote, vocational skills. We're going to teach you the theory, and then you'll figure out the vocational skills. But it turns out some of those skills about, what are the current modern technologies? How does coding and software engineering actually happen at a place like Facebook or Google or wherever else? Those are important too. But even then, if I just think about my own kids, I would say some exposure to coding is valuable. You don't need to become like a deep software engineer, but you should know what it is, how the thought processes that might get involved, because pretty much in any domain, some form of automation is going to be relevant in the future. But I think design is at least as important, if not more important. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, art school and design was kind of considered a very impractical thing to do. It is now a very practical thing to do, especially if you go into user and stereotypically. I mean, I don't like to say there's certain kind of design people and certain engineering type of people. I think they're both heavily analytical, they're both heavily creative, and there's a lot of overlap. But there are some people who you say design, they'll gravitate more to that than if you said software engineering. So I think design is incredibly valuable. But then there's other skills like project management, incredibly valuable generalist skill in pretty much anything. You become a Swiss Army knife, so to speak. I would say finance, accounting, law, like the basics. You don't need to have a lot, but if you've really mastered the basics there, you're really a potent individual in terms of what you're going to be able to do in the world. And so I am fascinated by, some of the certifications Google is pioneering right now around project management, around UX design. These are going to become very valuable skill sets and credentials. And Google's doing it in a way that it's not just for getting a job at Google. It's going to be a calling card that can be used anywhere. So I think I would recommend a student to just really master the core of each of these. If you've truly mastered, let's call it a semester's worth of accounting, truly mastered a semester's worth of finance, a semester's worth of design, project management, get some real experience out there, the basics of coding, you're going to be set up to pretty much enter. And then, to Krish's point about data science, statistics, data science, if you can just get essentially a freshman statistics, but truly master it, right. Once again, if you have that combination, you're going to be very, very formidable.
Great, thanks to you both for that. So I have a question here from the audience, but just want to give a little bit of some background.
Oh, and I'll add, you should write well.
Writing well is good.
I will 100% on that one as a former English.
That actually might be the most important. I mean, we forget, but
right. No, writing's pretty darn important. So, one thing that I think is so important about the work that you're both doing is that it sort of influences how young people are spending the majority of their time. So it's this, if you think about the typical, let's say K through 12 student, let's say in the US, they're in school half of days of the year. And on those days, it's for 6 hours. So it's an average of 3 hours a day. Suppose we say we got 9 hours for sleep and like eating, whatever. So we got 15 hours a day. So 20% of their sort of awake time, available time they're spending in school, but the other 80% is obviously not. It's changed a lot, as you both know, over the last 15 years, is the frequency with which students are using technology. I have 2 teenagers, and I see them on their phone from time to time. Maybe a bit more than from time to time. And as a parent, that's a technology that wasn't available when the 3 of us were there, teenagers or younger. How do you think about that? As we've got a lot of parents in the audience and a lot of young people in the audience too. How do you think about that? Like, is that there's so many ways I could ask the question, but I just sort of, that development, positive, negative, needs to be tightly managed, more laissez-faire. What do you think is the right approach? And this is both asking as a parent, but also, this is something that came in from the audience. How do we think about that? And is that a good or bad development for our young people?
Katrina, you want to take?
Go ahead, and then I'll hop in. Yeah.
Look, I don't think anyone knows the 100% solution here. I mean, I think we all have a lot of anecdotal evidence. There is some, when you look at, something seems to be broken from a mental health point of view. It might be that people are being more open about mental health, which is a good thing that they're being more open about it, which is why we see a higher prevalence. But it does seem like something is broken in terms of stress and anxiety amongst and depression amongst young people. When you look at statistics in high school and in college, it seems to be, and I'm not an expert here, but it seems to be disproportionate in young girls, but young boys are having it too. And there's kind of a different flavor of when the screen time seems to go wrong. If we were to make broad brush stereotypes, although there's definitely overlaps. So yeah, as a parent, as someone who cares about everyone's children, I think we have to be super, super careful about these things. Even we as adults see how easy it is, even though we have all the metacognition around, okay, I know this platform is trying to suck me in, it's trying to sell me ads, it's trying to agitate me because then I'll click on more stuff. Even then we can get sucked in. I mean, the amount of time that I've been sucked in on social media feeds looking at military tactics in the Ukraine for the past week, it's a little embarrassing. I haven't been as productive, and that's me knowing like, okay, they're just trying to suck me in, and they know what I'm interested in, and all of this type of thing. Even a 12 or 13-year-old Sal, and I think at 12 or 13, I was still a pretty aware young person, but that could have really sucked me in, and I could have gotten into a kind of complete zombie state. And I think that's a big risk. So, my oldest is 13. We just got him a cell phone for his birthday. We our default is that he does not have it. We only give it to him when he's going to be by himself. We monitor it very, very closely. And a lot of, and he's kind of your classic, he likes to use devices to code. He likes to use his devices to do a lot of the good things that Katrina was talking about. But even then, it's just, we just see when we if he gets too into it, he forgets to go outside. He forgets to do other things. And then if we take it away long enough, we feel that the family interaction is improving, et cetera. So I think there's good screen time and bad screen time, but I think you need to put the limiters on all screen time and just make sure that the other good things are happening. Dinner with your family, conversations, meeting people in person. I'll say one last thing, because this is a little bit unrelated to screen time, but it's connected, is that there's always been these debates about homework. And, the Cold War made us add more homework, et cetera. But the studies that I've seen, there's actually very little correlation between homework and success, but there is a correlation between having dinner with your family, having enough sleep, and success. And I cite that on your device question, because devices also, like homework, get in the way of having connections with other human beings, especially your family, and potentially your sleep. We, at our lab school, at Khan Lab School, we actually have no homework, but it's a full day school. So the kids come home at 6 o'clock, but they're done all of their work, so that when they come home, they can rest, relax, connect with their family.
Great, thanks for that. Katrina, yeah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so 100% echo what Sal was saying. When we talk about screen time, is how much screen time is good or bad is actually the wrong question. So it's sort of how are you using it? If you're using a screen time to be able to do a yoga routine with your child, that's a very different thing than if someone is like kind of spiraling through social media. It is, when I started college is when emails showed up. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like to have all your entire childhood and teenagehood being recorded, in social media. And we are seeing significant impacts for a lot of people around particularly young girls, around what they think is normal, and then how they compare themselves to that. And it's definitely impacting young people's mental health. But going back to what Sal was saying, like the piece that's important is actually this is the world we live in. So how are we preparing our kids to be able to interact in that world? How do I think we should deliberately actually teach them, hey, when an ad does this is what it's trying to do. Like, we should tell them and explain how technology works and how advertising works. And so that they have even just at least having that understanding of, because most young people don't. There's a really good book, which I actually happen to have right here, called Digital for Good. It's raising kids to thrive in an online world. It has really good practical things for parents. It's written by a friend of mine, Richard Collada, and it echoes the same things. It's around, you can take digital breaks. It doesn't mean technology is bad, but you want to, what does your life look like when you don't have technology? Are you making sure that you don't have devices at dinner when you're interacting with one another, and making sure, like, hey, it's about a balanced diet. You don't want to have, vegetables all the time. You don't want to have dessert all the time. And so being able to look at that and talk to your kids about it that way, so, because as soon as you say this is forbidden, any parent knows, suddenly, kids are doing it, on the side, but really having them understand how technology works, what it is trying to do, and having them really recognize, what do they want to use it for, and what other things, do they want to have in their lives to create some balance.
Yeah, I think dessert is definitely good, but I'm very grateful to you both, because this is going to inspire a conversation with my 14-year-old daughter this weekend about adjusting her device use. But anyway, so lots of great questions from the audience. Here's, and I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but here's one for both of you. I'm wondering, so the first one is sort of more for Sal, and the second one is more for Katrina, but feel free, each of you, to weigh in, to both weigh in. I'm wondering how the uptake is going with Khan Academy and Mastery across the spectrum of public and charter schools. And for Katrina, Zuckerberg-Chan Finance Summit schools, which also focused on Mastery like Khan, but maybe seemed to be a bit controversial. So thoughts for both of you. Maybe Katrina, do you want to start, or should Sal start?
Well, actually, one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we shifted to virtual. At the tech, and we were able to get 1.5 million downloads from one of our videos that was around inspiring kids to be able to use technology in the classroom. So for us, we've talked about it earlier in terms of that shift and what is how that is, it's accelerating our looking at being able to have a kind of a broader global impact. I think the question that folks are asking about is Summit Learning Schools, the Summit Learning Program. And I think that I'm no longer with us, but I think there's about 400 schools that are using that. I would say the similar thing is that it's a program, and so you need to make sure that all of the supports that are around that program at a particular school are you have teachers who are trained to know how to use that. One of the programs that Chan Zuckerberg initially, recently came out that's under that same umbrella, something called Along. And I actually do think that Along is a really strong program. It is designed with researchers, educators, and developers all at the same table. And it is more around how to create those relationships between kids and students. It kind of prompts teachers to be able to ask, and you can do it in a digital or in an online phase. But so that actually for me is one of the places where I see real potential around being able to use the best of each of those fields to really be able to have an impact on what teachers do best is relationships. And there is whatever technology should be designed around being able to make it easier for teachers. It's removing their administrative tasks. It's allowing them to have a more personalized experience for their kids. Tech should never replace a teacher. It's really around by helping them to be able to develop those relationships.
Sal, how about you on this?
Yeah, and mastery learning, it's not something that I or Khan Academy invented. The term was coined by Benjamin Bloom in 1984, and the famous 2 Sigma study, 2 standard deviation improvement. Now that was a very narrow kind of content base, and it was tutors, and he saw a very strong signal. But there's a lot of evidence that even with computer adaptive things, that you can approach 1 standard deviation improvement and things. And it depends what you're actually measuring. But I'd argue that mastery learning is actually the oldest way of learning. If you're learning a piano, if you're learning a martial art, if you're learning a sport, you're doing mastery learning most likely. That you're working with a coach. If your ball handling skills are not where they should be, the coach makes you keep working on those ball handling skills. If your free throw shot is not where it should be, you keep working on those. People talk about weak point training. That's essentially mastery learning. You have the opportunity and incentive to fill in any gaps you have and learn at your own time and pace. If you're already a 90% free throw shooter, don't have to practice that anymore. Go work on something else. That's the oldest. It's the oldest way of learning. It's actually in the 19th century, 18th and 19th centuries, when we introduced the very utopian and very bold idea of free mass public education, which has been transformational for the world. Like, we should give free mass public education credit for what it has done. It has dramatically improved the world, but it had to make some compromises. It said, okay, the old education, very few people got it, but it would be with tutors and it'd be very expensive, and that's what the nobility got. But if we're going to educate everyone, we're going to stick 30 kids in a room with 1 teacher. That 1 teacher is not going to be able to personalize for those 30 kids the way that the tutors of old did. We're going to have to just spray some information onto them according to it seems very scientific, a lesson plan on a particular cadence, assess them. And some of the kids are going to get the material to certain degrees, and then over time we sort them out. These are the kids that go into the knowledge economy. These are the kids that become the logistics managerial, and these are the kids that become essentially the low skilled or the unskilled labor. You fast forward to today. That method is, we now recognize there's a lot of inequity in that, and it's not going to meet our needs as a labor force. We know what's happening. Things are going to get automated, and essentially all of the wealth creation is going to be happening, or most of it is going to be happening in the knowledge economy. And so you're either going to have to do massive redistribution if most people aren't participating in the knowledge economy. That's not a good outcome. Or you get as many people into the knowledge economy as possible. And I would argue the only way you can do that is mastery learning. Now, and competency-based learning, which is kind of the corollary, which is it's not how long you sit in a chair and kind of learn something. It matters whether it takes you 4 weeks or 4 months or 4 years, whether you learn the thing or not. It's almost common sense. I think where we are on the journey, to answer the question, 10 years ago, even though it's an old idea, it felt like kind of a novel idea, but everyone philosophically agrees with it. I've spoken to groups, thousands of teachers, very traditional teachers, but they're all nodding when it comes to talk about mastery learning. I think what's been difficult is the implementation is different. Even though we're making tools, other people are making tools to do it. it is a completely different mindset for a teacher to say, oh, wait, it's okay if a student got an 80% for them to have another shot of improving their results. It's okay if different students in my class are working on different things. I should not feel, and I as a teacher need to be prepared for that. I think, unfortunately, not all teachers, but some teachers are kind of one lesson ahead of the class. And then, but if you have a situation where some of the kids are 4 months ahead and some of the kids are 4 months behind, it takes a little bit more as a teacher, a little to say, okay, I'm going to be able to support all of that. I have tools, but how am I going to be able to do that? So what we've been doing is we try to meet teachers and students where they are. We allow them to do some of what Katrina described of like, okay, we'll just automate your homework for you. We have the content, but then as you do those assignments on Khan Academy in a traditional way, potentially non-mastery way, you'll get mastery signals. Hey, these are the kids who did the assignment. This is what they got. Why don't you give them more shots? Because these kids still have trouble. And hey, did you realize that all of these students already mastered it? So why don't you let them start to move ahead? I think the thing that's really going to start to move the dial is when we can connect the mastery to real signals that have value in the whatever world, college admissions, college credit, high school credit, or job placement. So I think once you start seeing like what we're doing with Howard University, if we can get to a place with the New York City Department of Education, the CUNY system, where if a student gets mastery, they get college credit in algebra and physics and biology, et cetera, then I think I think you're going to see a lot more movement towards mastery and competency-based learning. Our focus over the next 5 years is to just put the pieces in place so that it's doable, and then show some very strong signals of it happening. And hopefully we can get, the 20 or 30 or 40 million folks who are coming every month to get closer and closer to that ideal.
I want to just underscore the piece around teachers need training and the tools to be able to do this well. It's very different than how they were taught to teach. And I would say that most classrooms are just kids are a few months behind, but we've got many of our classrooms where kids are years behind, in the same classroom. And that's a place where we need to help teachers and both getting them the tools they can use to do that and the training that they need.
And I'll just double down what Katrina said. I encourage people visit a middle school classroom in an underserved area, and even sometimes a well-served area. But I visited a KIP classroom and actually a KIP that's a high performing place. And I was visiting the classroom. This was about 3 months ago. These were 7th and 8th graders. And the number of students, they were doing exponent properties, and they were learning, okay, 2 to the 3rd power. Then if you take that to the 5th power, that's the same thing as 2 to the 15th power. So they have to do 3 times 5 on the exponents, right? They got the concept. These were, these kids are as bright as anybody, but the number of kids I saw take their fingers out to multiply 3 times 5 or take a calculator out. And, this is very traditional. I sound like a very almost like Victorian father when I'm saying this, but like no one took the time for them to even get fluency on their multiplication tables. And so it's the cognitive load that is taking them to do these pre-algebra problems. They're at a huge, my 7-year-old I've taken the time where if you say what's 3 times 5, my 7-year-old will tell you 15 quite quickly and understand the concept. But because the system is not doing mastery learning, these kids had that gap in 2nd or 3rd or 4th grade, and it's just sitting with them their whole life. And unfortunately, these kids are just as bright as my kids, in many cases probably brighter, but these are the kids that are gonna either flunk out or they're going to place into remedial math. College algebra is the biggest gating factor for getting a college degree. And these kids are going to fall into that because I would argue they didn't have the supports and the incentives of mastery learning.
Okay, well, thank you both so much. That was a really such an informative conversation, and I'm glad that we were able to get a fair number of questions from the audience. Sal and Katrina, thank you both so much for joining us and helping us gain a much deeper understanding of the issues. I sort of feel more hopeful about the contribution of technology to educational achievement and it's sort of overall well-being among our kids. I think it's, can always get better, but I think the two of you, having people like the two of you in the mix is a unambiguously positive force for the world in this space. For our CPRA associates, I hope you'll join us in just a couple minutes for our exclusive session with Sal and Katrina, where you'll be able to ask more questions. And for those, and just for everyone, I hope you'll be able to join us at 10:30 for our next main panel on the future of work. So with that, we're going to wrap this session and see hopefully everyone on here very soon. Thanks again, Sal and Katrina.
For having us, Mark.
Thank you.